every time I come in here, you are hyped up on something.
I'm not today. I'm just happy. I'm not. I guess I did have a Diet Mountain Dew, so I kind of am jacked up on Diet Mountain Dew. But
You have a iced coffee sitting over there too.
That thing,
that's half empty.
Okay, let's just talk about that real quick. I got that at 8:30 this morning, and my daughter said, "Get this," and I ordered it, and that's how much I've choked down. I'm not going to talk about the establishment that has a picture on the front and it matches up, and we know where it is. And I had to say words I've never said before in a sentence. And they put it in a drink, and that's why you should never say those words in a sentence and have them put it in the drink.
Unless you know what it is.
It is not what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
So,
well, welcome to the Lucky 13 podcast,
we're back,
where we talk about all things people and profit and business.
And Indiana football, of course.
Yeah. And so my co-host is Mr. Joshua Hauser.
Hi, guys.
And I am Mike Lantz. And so we're excited to be back with all of our listeners. I think we're up to 3 million listeners or something like that.
If you want to round down.
It's a rounding error. Yeah. So we're excited about today. We got together and I said, what's the lead in? And it wasn't my choice. It was your choice.
Look, I got to give you kudos. I was at the Indiana State football game last week, and I was watching 2 games at once because I was flipping over. I saw the early interception, but I was watching all morning, all the hype at College Game Day. What an experience. What an atmosphere. I'm a football guy by trade. I love Indiana and Purdue. I love making fun of Indiana because I grew up in Purdue country. Yeah. But, man, that looked amazing. But I asked this question. I said, were you there? And you sheepishly said, yes. I don't know if I want to know what all that means, but I want to know what it was like.
I'll tell you. So for those of you who are like living under a rock, what you're talking about is that College Game Day was at Indiana University. Indiana was horrible last year. We hired a new coach, Curt Cignetti. All of a sudden, we're 8-0. We've never been 8-0 since 1976. I hadn't even been 5-0 since 1967. I wasn't even born then. I was born in 1970.
Huh. So another rounding error.
But it was fantastic. So I share season tickets with a good friend of mine,
and I've used those before. Thank you.
You have,
yeah.
But it was just electric. So we got to go and see, the guy, doof 2 kicks instead of earn $100.
Did he make it?
No, it was bad. And we're soccer school there too.
Yeah,
you could have thought they could have found somebody with it. So it was just great. It was electric. It was great to see. I've been an IU sports fan since coming out of the womb. So I've gone through some rough times, especially when it relates to football. So it's exciting to see it. Who knows how long it'll last. I go into every week thinking we're going to lose.
You got Michigan State this week. That's a win.
Michigan State on the road, then Michigan, then an off week, and then Ohio State, the big one. So it's funny.
I'm happy for you.
Funny little story. Speaking of all this, so my son Mason.
Of course.
Mason is my middle son or my middle kid. He lives in New York City. He's sitting around with his buddies in his apartment, and this is in August, and he's talking about how excited he is for IU football. And one of his roommates, and all his roommates went to IU. They're like, "What? It's just gonna be another losing season." And Mason's like, "No, it's not." And so one of his roommates goes, "You give me $100 right now, and I'll pay you $1,000 if they make it to the playoffs." So he says that, and Mason goes, "You got?" And then he stopped and he looked on DraftKings. And he could put the same $100 down to win $10,000. So he did it.
Did he really?
Yeah. So
my goodness.
He would rather. I asked him the very poignant question though. I said, would you rather have IU go to the playoffs or get the $10,000? And he gave the right answer. He'd rather have IU go to the playoffs. So, but he followed it up with, well, then Dad, you're going to have to pay to send.
No, he's going to spend the $10,000 to go to the.
That's what he is going to do.
Watch the game.
That's what he is going to do. So it was exciting. But one of the things, and I have a little bit of a pet peeve about something, and I know I'm probably going to make some people mad, but when I'm scrolling through LinkedIn and things like that, and everybody turns every life event into a leadership lesson, drives me crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Talk about that.
But I will tell you, I'm about ready to do that. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me. And we should take this into consideration in our business.
Let's do it.
Scott Dolson, athletic director at IU, made one hire. And that's all the difference. One hire. He basically went out, fired Tom Allen. 5 days later, he hires Curt Cignetti. And that has made all the difference in the world.
Isn't it amazing?
And it's amazing how sometimes we tolerate things inside a business because we're tolerating a person or something like that. And sometimes you're one hire away from everything changing.
Yeah, and I'll even say you would not get me to say a bad thing about Tom Allen as a person.
No,
he's a
not at
wonderful
all.
person. But at the end of the day, accountability, right? And discipline. There's a good friend of mine, Justin Mouse, talks about that success loves discipline, and discipline breeds success. And it sounds like what this guy has installed, what the Marlboro towel has installed, which, by the way, I love the towels, is that. And isn't it amazing when you bring one person in and all of a sudden the torchbearer is leading you down a new cave that you've never been into, which for you guys is an 8-0 cave.
Yeah. One of the other things that he said, and I might have brought this up on a previous podcast, but I'll say it again. You've always talked about the turd in the punch bowl.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the turd in the punch bowl, for those of you who haven't heard that, is you could have a turd that is encased in ice and you throw it in the punch bowl and the punch tastes the same.
Yeah, it's cool.
Right? Until it starts to melt.
Yep.
And then it starts to fuse out.
Yes, it does.
He did the reverse. He's been asked several times, why'd you bring 14 guys in from James Madison? Because they're not all playing. And he said, because I wanted to seed people into the team that knew what my culture was all about. Brilliant. So it wasn't the turd in the punch bowl, it was the opposite, right? It was the extra flavor in the
fresh
punch bowl.
ice.
Yeah, to make sure that what he was preaching at the top culturally was getting infused. And I had an experience where this happened in our business too. So you know Amber Fields.
Of course.
So
by the way, shout out to Amber. She's a stud.
She's awesome. And I've said this publicly to her and about her in front of her, so I'm not speaking out of school. But when I bought True You had been struggling for years, losing lots of money. And when I brought her in, when I interviewed her to run True You, I just looked at her and I said, there's nothing on your resume that tells me that you can be successful doing this. I said this to her. And I said, convince me why you can be successful. And she did. And I hired her and she has turned that place around and she's done so many great things. We made her a partner a couple of years ago and she's been absolutely fantastic. When I hired Signetti, there were so many people, and I probably put myself in there, seeing some of the other candidates to say, I don't know. Like, you haven't really been a head coach at a high level. You're coming from James Madison. You did a really great job. But, you know, he's brought in the culture of winning and said, we're not going to tolerate for anything less than that. And you got to do what you got to do. And you show up every day committed to the team to go win. And it comes down to that one person.
Yeah, and you lead me to something. I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about Amber for a second in a good way. People don't buy products, right? They buy people that have a product that can serve, right? And so if you can sell yourself as a person and gain that trust immediately, whatever that product is, whether it be a service, whether it be a leadership academy, whether it be a plumbing fixture, I trust you, and that you put her through that test, the wisdom to have that. No, this is your only compliment for the day, so you better put that away. But the wisdom to say, tell me why you. And I'm wondering how many people are going through those experiences when they're hiring that key employee. You fit all the X and O's I have on my page, but I need to know about you more because the you is what's going to lead us, not what you have on your resume.
Yeah, and it came down to, we're not getting into this, but it came down to really evaluating, are you the right culture fit? Do you get it? Do you want it? Do you have the capacity to do it? And how do you fit up with what our 5 core values are?
Boy, can I give a shout out? Please, people, if you don't know what that is, look it up and go through Gets It Once. I've been doing this for the last 2 weeks with a couple new teams. And that Gets It Once capacity is just light bulb moments. Yeah. And a lot of them are just conversations. Sometimes it's not an automatic termination. It's just, I'm not sure if they get it, or I'm not 100% sure, and this is the key one, if they want it. Yeah. Right? And so what happens is I see this, and I think this is what Signetti's changed about the IU football program. People aren't going to practice. They're going to purpose. Yes. People don't go to make a living. They want to go make a purpose, make an impact. And when you get that kind of person who's in the Gets It Once at seat, man, you got a bunch of people waking up every day that if you can get them aligned to the same purpose, i.e. IU 8-0, they're all lined up to the same purpose. Who cares who scores? Who cares who's done? I know there's people on watch lists. I don't even know. Yeah. All I know is the red helmet right now. Yeah, and that's what matters. Yeah. So that was our lead in. We didn't even we gave a few nuggets there, but how about that? But really what the topic is today, and I get a lot of people that ask me about this, and then they ask it as it relates to you. Like when I tell people the reason we call this Lucky 13 is because you have 8 kids, I have 5. We have saints for wives. Oh, yeah. And a lot of people will ask, like, what's it like, running business and raising 5 kids? And like, I can't believe what Josh does. Like, he does all these things and he's raised 8 kids or is raising 8 kids and all of that. So I thought it'd be kind of an interesting conversation for you and I to have on what mistakes did we make? Yeah. Because you've been married 27 years. I'll be married 27 years in May. Oh, good for you.
And so we ought to talk a little bit about that because I know I made lots of mistakes, but I think my wife and I figured some things out and did some things right relative to raising the kids as well as that. And so I thought it would just be an interesting conversation.
That is, because I think about, let me tie this together for myself, that a small business owner is actually just, in my house, it's a 9th kid. When I started a business, it was the ninth child. At one time, it was the third, then it was the fourth, then the fifth. But when you're a small business, it is another child in your house, and it takes the same kind of energy, maybe a different emotion, but it does wake you up in the middle of the night. It does cause you anxiety and stress, no different than our kids do, and you got to find a way to keep balance between all those. So I think your topic's right on point. If you're a small business owner right now, and you're waking up trying to figure out how am I going to close this deal, get home by 5:30 to go trick-or-treating tomorrow night, that's a real thing.
That is
and you're
a real
trying
thing.
to put it all in place.
Yeah, exactly. And so let's talk about it. So like, give me one thing that as you look back at your 27 years that you think that you and your wife did right.
I think let's just use this priorities. And first, before I say all this, I'm going to give a quick shout out. Tiffany Sauter, and I'm telling everybody who's listening or anybody who knows somebody who might listen, please go look up The Life of And. Because what she helped me understand is that
The life of and.
The life of A-N-D.
Yes,
and.
right.
And I think that my wife and I did a really good job of not having a life of or. And we didn't realize it. Now we can articulate it, and Tiffany's done such a good job of helping me even see it more clearly. But the life of and is we figured out that we can have and. I didn't have to be a business owner or a father or a husband or a wannabe still athlete that still was playing in church leagues and softball leagues and what have you. So as I look back, I think one of the things that we did when the life of and really teaches you is we really worked on our priorities first. And we prioritized everything. And to be honest, we've learned, and our priorities have changed through life, right? We aware and adapt, but we prioritize, and I forgive anybody who, please don't be mad at me, faith, family, and then everything else.
Yeah, sure.
And so even when the work world was starting to fail, my family was what I fell back on, and that allowed me to get recharged, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I had written down family plan, kind of the same idea. Whether it's, I think the EOS VTO is a great tool to use.
There's
for
a personal
family too.
VTO with it too.
Right. But thinking about like, what do we want? Like, I'm assuming that a lot of our listeners here are already married, right? And they're already in a relationship moving forward, and they probably have kids and things like that. But really sitting down and going, what do we really want? An example would be, my wife and I used to talk about all the time that I'd like to be retired by 55 to 60, and we'd move to Florida. And guess what? That sounds like I want to vomit to actually do that, to be honest with you. I hate golf. I hate golf.
Yeah,
like, what would I do? I would start dying is what I would start doing. And we had kind of a re-conversation around that. And I said, hey, I said to Julie, I go, I got to be honest with you about something. And she's like, oh, thank goodness, because I don't want to do that. I don't want to retire at 55 or 60 and move to Florida. That's good for some people. That just wasn't good for us, right?
Understood.
Because I enjoy what I do and things like that. So it's about having this family plan and getting on the same page. And it's never too late to have that conversation to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
It's so ironic that you talk about. I just finished a focus day yesterday, and if you've ever been in an EOS focus day, we start the day with the concept of, do you want to be a great leadership team, and how we're going to break through the ceiling of complexity. Which the ceiling of complexity is you go through a revolution of life to have an evolution. Does that make sense? In the very first lesson that we teach in this, the number one rule we start with our leadership teams is you have to be good parents. Now, I want you to think about that. We're talking about business owners about being good parents, and right now we're talking about how do we be good parents and be a business owner at the same time, because they do coexist. And so the 3 rules we teach, and see if this resonates with you. Number 1 is you got to have a handful of rules, the non-negotiables. Right. So is it your core values? Is it the way you live? It's we're going to have dinner, 5 nights a week at 4:00. Our family's gone to a 4:15 dinner hour right now, and we are all fighting to get there at 4:15. Just a handful. But if you get too many, they get too stretched. Does that make sense? Number 2 is you have to repeat those rules and those lessons 7 times. Now, my kids, probably because of my DNA, are slow learners. So I think it's 700 times, but repeat them often. And so as a business owner, that's what we're doing all the time. We train something, we have a new idea. We often hear, you're just not communicating with me. It's not that you're not communicating, you're not communicating enough. You got to do it 7 times. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And then the third rule that we teach in that is you have to walk the talk. Now, as parents, we often say, do as I do as I say, not as I do. But when you start to say, you know what, I'm going to have them do as I do as well, because that's what we got to do in the work life. So if we're here, we can't say do as I say, not as I do, because that contradiction with other adults. Well, let's treat our kids like that. And I give credit. My kids raised me. My first 4. My second 4 are getting the benefit of what the first 4 did for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But they forced me to start walking it and less talking it.
Yeah.
Does that resonate to you?
Yeah.
And so think about that. From an EOS side, when we start with a business owner, we start with, you got to be a good parent, handful of rules, repeat it 7 times, walk the talk. Well, what we're talking about right here is the same thing.
Same thing.
And that puts you in this so-called world of balance, which isn't about time, it's about peace.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I can speak for both of us by saying we weren't perfect at all of this, right?
No.
And we learned our lessons along the way. And I even, my youngest of 5 is 20. And there are things now when I look back, I'm like, man, I really botched that. Like I really screwed that up, or so we're not perfect in any way, shape, or form, but I think there are some things. What we're trying to bring out a little bit is some revealing some of those mistakes. I'll give you an example. Like I was a workaholic in probably the early 2000s. Like I worked way too much. I traveled way too much and for my work. And I remember my wife saying to me one time, she goes, "Who's dying?" And I was like, "Excuse me?" And she goes, You're not an emergency surgeon or emergency doctor, or like what really is going to change for you and your business tomorrow by you staying at the office an extra hour? What's really going to change?
Great curve.
Or do you really have to take that business trip? Like take it next week because your kid's got these events this week. Could you take it next week? And it was kind of a smash in the face a little bit, but she was right. And I always think about that all the time. It's like, what? I'm not a surgeon. I'm not saving anybody's life. I'm helping people in their business, helping people in their lives. But it doesn't, certainly if it's an emergency and it has to happen now, it can happen now. But that's really comes back to priorities. Like, what are our priorities? And so, one of the mistakes, like I said, one of the mistakes I made, I probably traveled a little bit too much when I was early on, and I wasn't as present as I wanted to be. Or sometimes even I was maybe there, but wasn't present as I wanted to be, right?
Nor where your feet were.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm glad when I can look back, that was my darkest moments of life when I was living the life, if you will, the life of travel, the life I was eating steak and my wife and kids were having chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese at home, and I didn't see it.
Yeah.
And until I almost lost it, you don't see it.
Yeah.
Let me give you something else that Amanda and I do well, and I think good entrepreneurs need to think about this. We have a check-in, check-out. Amanda really held me to this. I can't get out of the car on a phone call and come in the house. When I walk in the house, my kids expect to see their dad, not the entrepreneur. Yeah. And so when I have to deal with something business-wise when I'm at home, I get out of the house. I don't want to violate that space. That space is for our family. Yeah. And although I want my business to be a part of my family, I don't want it to interrupt it or disrupt it. Yeah. The same thing with my kids. I don't want them to come here and disrupt. Does that make sense? Yeah. We don't take our kids to work with us all the time. Yeah. I shouldn't take my business home. And so Amanda was very, very clear with me. Take your calls outside. I don't want the kids to have to be quiet in the house because you're on a call. Yeah. I don't want them to have to turn down the TV or not yell Yahtzee when they're rolling dice. Does that make sense? And so that was so critical. And I think about our entrepreneurs when they're going home. If you're taking work in, you haven't separated it yet. Yeah. And so your priorities, although you don't think they're off, you got to look through. You put yourself in their eyes for a second. Yeah. Is that my dad or is that a business owner? How do I know the difference? When do I know he's unplugged?
Yeah, yeah. And so. Love that, and I think I made a lot of those mistakes in that that regard. One of the things that I always early on was striving for was work-life balance, and I realized that work-life balance doesn't exist. It's work-life integration. Oh, and so and there were times where I took my kids to work, or there were times where I'm working and one of my kids has an activity in the middle of the day, and I'm able to go do it. And now that's just common, but like in the early 2000s, it wasn't as common.
No.
Or when I actually worked for somebody between 95 and 2000, that wasn't all that common. No. Here's your PTO days. Yeah. You want to go to your kid's parent-teacher conference, you take part of your PTO to go do it.
Correct.
Right? And now, so I learned that very early on that life integration is important. So I like hey, leave the house. I don't want people to be quiet, and at the same time, we can integrate the two.
Correct.
So that you can be at your personal things and business at the same time.
Yeah, that balance is so critical, and I love that balance is at time. I think you nailed it, and I think people hear work-life balance and they put some sort of teeter-totter with 8 hours and 8 hours. It's
impossible to do.
It's not,
especially when you have kids that go to bed at 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night.
And so to battle that, you're going to battle a battle that doesn't need to be fought. Yeah. Right? It's a good friend of mine says you don't need to create a government where one's not needed. Yeah. You don't need to create strife where you don't have strife needed. Trying to get that balance hours. Don't look at it that way. I love this word integration. I'd love to dive into that in a future podcast.
So if I look back and I asked Julie, I told her I stopped her at a store on the way over here. I told her the podcast that I was going to propose. And I said, what do you think the number one reason is that we've had troubles, right? As all couples do. But what's the number one thing that's kept us bonded? And she said, date night. And
thank you.
Since we were dating, she had a professional career, as did I. And since we were dating, we always knew that one night a week we were going to meet, go out to dinner, grab a couple drinks, whatever it is, go to a movie, whatever. It changed, go to a ball game, whatever it is. But one time a week, I could probably count on two hands, two toes, or 2 feet in 27 years where we have not had a date night at least once a week.
So less than once a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
How about that?
Yeah.
So you're 51 out of 52 weeks every year.
Yeah. And that's no exaggeration. Like
that's awesome.
That's not like, hey, 90%. Like that is the facts.
I'm really hoping Amanda doesn't hear this because I'm kept in failure now.
Well, I don't, that worked for us.
Yeah.
Like it didn't, because your kids are close together as well, but it's hard in the house to sit and talk about meaningful, important things when you got kids all over you all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And we always use that time to connect. How things going? How are you doing? How am I doing? How are we doing? What can I help you with? What can you help me with? That sort of thing. And we had a lot of fun doing that. And we still do. Every Thursday night, we can be seen at Tilly's Pub over there on 82nd Street.
Awesome.
And
wait till I crash that.
We'll be over there having a couple of drinks and a little bit of food. And, it's what we do.
I love it.
With all the kids out of the house, we actually do it more often.
I love it. Last thing I'm going to add to that, because you called it out, and I had to circle it, is that you guys have a designated time to do a real deep check-in with each other.
Yeah.
And I find that entrepreneurs, you can have a bad day, and all of a sudden there's a light check-in at home, and it could throw me for a loop.
Yeah.
Right? And so my wife and I have really worked on it. It sounds like you guys have nailed this. What about, we talk about having an issues list. Why not just have that issues list for that date night and know that you're going to be in the right frame of mind? You're going to check in. How's it?
Yeah.
Okay, what's the big things that we need to get resolved this week?
Yeah.
Because most of the time the issues aren't each other.
Yeah.
It's a problem that you two are holding.
Yeah.
And I think early in my entrepreneur career, I couldn't decipher that I had a bad day here and that somebody Kobe lost his baseball glove. Oh my God. And the world was coming apart. It really wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
It really wasn't.
Yeah.
But because it was a pile on, so we started setting some boundaries on when do we deliver and when do we don't.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to bring up relative to kids, and I want to bounce this one off of you, because I think both of us, our kids did a lot of, we had a philosophy in our family. If your kid is not involved in something, they're not getting in trouble, right? It's just the way the world is these days, right?
With you.
If I looked at all the people that my kids were friends with that were getting in trouble, they weren't involved. Like whether that's in your church or whether that's playing sports or in music so I had 2 in the band and I had a couple that played sports and all this kind of stuff. And so it was important that they were involved in these activities. But at the same time, from our perspective, it was important that we, Julie and I, we were there for our kids. And what that looked like is every night but date night, we were there sitting on a couch. And I know that sounds like really lazy and all of that, but then inevitably, a couple times a week, it'd be 10:30 at night, and we're sitting there on the couch reading or talking or watching television or something. We hear the footsteps upstairs coming down. Mom and Dad, I need to talk to you about something.
Yep.
Right? And unfortunately, I do have some acquaintances that I have that weren't there in that way, and their kids just didn't feel that open to be able to go and talk to them. And so that was something that was very intentional, and it was I would say in many ways it felt like a sacrifice on our part because we couldn't go do some things that we wanted to go do because we wanted to be there for our kids.
Yeah, let me tie one more EOS to it. We talk about the good news is everything that's gone great with your kids, you're responsible for. The bad news is everything that's gone great, what's gone bad with your kids, you're responsible for.
Yeah.
And you need to be present for both. You can't just be there when they score the touchdown or the band wins the state championship. You have to be there and ready to be there when, forgive me, poop hits the fan.
Yeah.
And it's going to. And if you've created an environment in your business and at your home where people can approach you, the peace that you'll get from that, even though it feels like it's not peaceful, you've given a gift.
Yeah.
And I love that you call that out. And my kids, everyone looks at all the Facebook stuff and they all look amazing. Man, we're pooping and doing snow angels in it on the regular, right?
Yeah.
But Mom and Dad are there when we're doing snow angels. Say, okay, you done doing snow angels? All right, let's clean off and think about how we don't do that again.
Yeah, exactly. Last one I'll throw out is be on the lookout for. And again, you can't know this and understand this until you're on the side of it. Of like, okay, they're all raised, and you're looking back at them. Be on the alert for the yes kid, the kid that is a people pleaser.
Oh,
okay.
Oh.
And as I look at that, as I look at my parenting in the past 25 years. That is what I didn't pay enough attention to. I was paying a bunch of attention to the ones that were causing a bunch of problems, And what I found is that the yes kid, and I got a couple of them, they're the ones that are going to come after they're grown-ups.
Yep.
Or grown,
They've
more
never
grown
gone through conflict.
And they're going to be like, okay, we need to have some conversations.
Yep.
Like about things that happened in my past or in my childhood. And what I tried to do is what my kid, I think a couple of my kids tried to do is just make life easier on Julie and I, because we had so many kids and they were so close together, and be on high alert for those kids, because those are the ones that aren't necessarily being heard and aren't speaking up.
Yeah, we talk about it in the workplace, right? You need to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If we've done anything, we've put our kids in positions where they have to be advocates for themselves. And so we make them get into those uncomfortable states. Now, younger parent, I made everything uncomfortable, right? And so I do the challenge, and don't just say yes to me, boss. And I want to go back and beat the hell out of myself. But I'm so thankful I went through that, because now my older four help my younger four by not allowing them to be the yes kid. They won't allow them just to go through that. And they went through that direction as well. But we really advocate that even our 12-year-old gets mad about soccer. I'm not calling your coach. You're going to.
Yeah.
And we want them to go through conflict now so that they understand that they can get through it. And we've talked about it on the podcast. It's 20 seconds of courage and 5 minutes of awkward. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Constantly put your kids, no different than you put your employees, no different than you put your other leaders, in that 20 seconds of courage and 5 minutes of awkward, because there's gold on the other side of that.
Yeah.
But you got to get there.
Yeah, for sure. I said that was the last thing, but I got one more thing.
Let's do it.
And you inspired it, because in many ways, one of the things I've always admired about your kids is the connection that they have, how they root for each other, how they cheer for each other, and all of that. I don't have a really strong relationship with my two sisters, and my parents are not well, right? And so there's going to be a point in time, and my wife doesn't have a great relationship with her sisters as either. And so there's going to be a point in time where my parents are gone. And if that relationship is not there, then you're kind of an only child then.
100%.
And we both kind of recognized that early on, Julie and I, and we have really tried to foster the relationship between our 5 kids. And you've done a masterful job at that, because the fact of the matter is we're all going to be gone before them, without tragedy and things like that.
Yeah.
But we're going to be gone before them, and they need to have a family.
Well, I give credit to my wife first. I was more of a Bobby Knight with my first 4 kids. I'll just get all 4 of them mad at me, and then they'll lean on each other. And that worked, and I love that they're so close. I know I don't want to go through that again. Where I was, and I shouldn't say I'm not a yeller or screamer, but I was constantly challenging.
Yeah.
And when they had their breakdowns, they leaned on each other. Now I've learned that I don't have to take them to that breakdown. So I don't regret any of that. I want to make sure those were, and by the way, I've apologized to all 4. That's important for me to deal with as well. But I think my kids all look at each other, that we say at the end of the day, we play for the name on the back in this family.
Yeah.
When you're out there, for your teammates, you play for the name on the front. I'm 100% you play for the name on the front. But when you're out there and your name's on the back, you represent bigger than us.
Yeah.
And that's not just on how your skills are.
Yeah.
That's, do you help somebody off the field? Are you the one hustling? Are you caught walking? And then when it's bad, do you have 7 other people that you can call that don't care? Yeah. They don't care if you play good or bad. They just care about, are you going to be home for Thanksgiving? Yeah. And that's, I give credit to my wife on that. And I know it seems like I talk a lot. I don't say a word at my house. When those guys are home, I just sit and watch, because it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. It was again, not trying to relate everything to business, because that kind of drives me nuts a little bit. But we have a client, and there's been some questions around this client. Is our culture as strong as we want as it is? Because maybe they'll plan some events and not everybody will show up and all of that. Well, they had an all-company meeting a couple of weeks ago. And then apparently there's an entire after party afterlife that the executive team just wasn't getting invited to.
Oh, wow.
But this one time, the COO got invited, and it lasted until about 1 a.m. And he came in on Monday and he goes, "Our culture's just fine." But it was because they all enjoyed being together.
Yes.
And they all supported each other.
Yes.
And they went out and had a good time together. And so sometimes we have to, as business leaders and owners, we have to foster that, but it may not include us. We have to be okay with the fact that they're creating relationships in that way.
And you said the right word. You got to create the environment, but you can't force it upon them. You got to let them find it.
Yeah, good. Well, I know this wasn't. I suppose we could make the connection between people and profit, but this was all about, because it's a struggle for men and women alike on how you handle it all.
So I would argue we did make a connection on profit. Wealthy is a life well lived. And if you can't have a life well lived at home and the business together, then there is no profit.
Yeah, good deal. All right, great
Appreciate
chat.
it.
Thanks,
See
man.
you.
Bye.